Hi, and welcome to If These Heels Could Talk. I'm JoyGenea with Solutions by JoyGenea.
And I'm Michelle with Bad Cat Digital. And today we're talking about permission.
What kind of permission, Michelle?
Well, this came up because I've noticed some things. You can kind of see it in some ways, like on committees you're on or with staff. There's some people, or any sort of group project. There's some people who just do things, who just get something done, who decide and do. And then there are some people who kind of sit around and wait for somebody to tell them what to do.
And I'm going to add another category.
Yep.
And there's another group of people who are waiting to be given permission to speak, or so not even so much waiting to be included. Right. They have a great idea. They've got thoughts or something.
But in order for them to share it, they're not going to volunteer it. You have to somebody has to, a facilitator or somebody that they respect, as the person in charge or whatever, has to specifically say, "What do you think, Sharon?"
Yes.
Or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not picking on people named Sharon.
Right.
Yeah. But I have noticed that this does tend to be, it tends to happen in mixed environments. And it's not just women, it's people who are the least represented or feel the least represented in the
minority group.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, but the definition
within the environment.
Right.
Yes.
Within that, they're outnumbered.
Right.
Let's just put it that way. They are the minority.
So I've seen that in Minnesota, but I also see it. I think it is kind of a cultural Midwest thing. The kind of we're couching it in politeness, or we're like, waiting for. But there's a really big element here of fear, of not wanting to stick your neck out too far, of not wanting to be wrong, of anxiety, or just plain old fear of the group not agreeing with you, or
I'm
something
gonna go
like
to
that.
number one here for getting over that.
Of wanting to be liked by everybody. Yes. And so a fear that people won't like you, or a fear that, and so there's a whole litany of fears that speaking out or speaking up or can bring about in people. And so waiting for permission gives people kind of the cloud cover they need to say, well, if they don't like what I have to say, then they shouldn't have asked for it.
I think that's one of the things it brings out. I think I would add to that. I would go, yes, and totally with that, on the fact that it's also, you brought up Central Minnesota. And one thing, when I was in the diversity program and training and stuff, it really advanced very good. When we did the chart of conflict, and realized that everybody doesn't actually feel the same way about conflict.
No.
And so just and some people actually interpret conflict as being any disagreement
at all.
Any form of like, well, I don't see it like that. Or, that's not how I see it. Tell me more, or something. Even that would be considered, whoa, that's conflict. Like, I can't handle it.
Yeah.
That group of people in this particular location actually was the most dominant section. So they viewed, and we found it, I was in that section at the time. I would actually say I've now moved. I would be like, thanks to that and my awareness of it, I've actually moved myself.
Because what constructive conflict, and we're not talking about just fighting.
No.
We're talking about professional differences of opinion and how constructive conflict can be, because two people in conflict can get to a solution that's better than either one of them could think of alone.
Well, without that, where would our legal system be?
Oh, totally.
Like I thought of lawyers, right? Like once we started to really dig into what particularly my heavy group over there of overpopulated section felt, we were like, well, isn't all conflict bad? And they're like, well, how would the legal system work?
Right.
How would politics work?
See, the thing is that conflict exists whether we want it to or not. And so by not acknowledging it, we're not avoiding it. We are simply ignoring it and letting it fester in different ways. And then it comes out in big dramatic ways that it doesn't need to be.
Well, what else gets ignored? That's right. That's what really we kind of
on our undermines trust, because then you have all of those feelings underneath, underneath the lack of perceptible conflict. You have all of those feelings underneath there, and those don't go away. They don't, it's like you don't deal with it. It doesn't just
well, and then you
go away.
But then you project it onto somebody else who completely doesn't understand why you're projecting those feelings, because they actually thrive in conflict potentially. So they're hoping to have the conversation.
What's interesting is this concept of waiting for permission and conflict avoidance and how they work together.
They are tangled.
I think they're basically the same thing. And I think it's one way of saying, how do I develop a comfort level around disagreeing with somebody or being disagreed with? Or how do I develop a comfort level around not being liked? And let's be very clear. There are circumstances and situations where for some people to speak up, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Actively dangerous, and they're not safe. And we are not talking about that.
Listen to your gut on that, by the way.
That is a completely different conversation. We are not talking about that. When the only thing that we have to lose is that somebody might look at us sideways for a second or not understand what we're doing.
Or they might not like it. Like a small group of the room might not like us.
Or they might not agree. That is not lack of safety. That is our own fear. So there's this spectrum, right? Like this line of at what point am I comfortable being vulnerable, even though I'm not necessarily even though maybe I'm physically safe, am I emotionally safe? How emotionally safe am I? And that line is going to be different for everybody.
Yes.
And there's a lot of privilege in this chair. There's a lot of privilege in both of these chairs. And so we're not talking about that.
Nope.
We're talking about situations where people are by and large safe, emotionally safe, physically safe, and that they could very easily speak up. About the color of the background of the diorama for the kids' project that they're working on.
Well, and when we're talking about permission, you brought up an example, like you say somebody's name,
right?
So that's one way to enhance the experience for people, particularly I'm just going to say when they're on boards or when you're in a business meeting or something. If you particularly notice, like, I had this experience. I particularly noticed that one particular person was not ever really kind of participating. So the next time we had a board meeting, I sat next to that person. I struck up a little bit of a conversation to find out what their fear factor was, basically. Right. Like, were they just immensely shy and this was their best way? Like I sized that up. And then I asked them about a specific thing and said, what are your thoughts on this? Like, we're going to talk more about this later.
Right.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it and stuff. And I saw it like this. This person had brilliant insight. I asked them if they would be comfortable sharing that when the time came. And if not, if they would be okay if I shared it, acknowledging that we had this conversation. Yeah. And it turned out very shy. And they went, boy, if you would share that, that'd be fine. And they did this. And this was the part where I was like, no, this is where the permission lies. And you don't have to tell anybody that we talked about it. Like you can just, like, they gave it to me and I'm like, oh, okay. I could tell, like, we would have a discussion. Right. I'm like, I hear you. That's not what I'm going to do. And I said, but trust me, it won't hurt. Like this will be very nice. And it did. It went really well. And afterwards, people went, wow, that was, And
I would say that's the point that it got. I think that's the point where it starts to get a passive aggressive. So I would say that I totally understand people not wanting to share in a large group. Totally get it. Some people think about things differently. They want to share differently. Yeah. And I was just going to say, in a large group, if you're trying to pull somebody out, having a private conversation with them in advance or separately kind of helps give them a different avenue to feel a little bit more safe. But when it goes to the point where they're unwilling to own their own thoughts,
that was tough,
and put their name on their own thoughts, that's when it goes from being, well, I'm waiting for permission to speak, or I'm waiting for permission to be included, into, I'm afraid of this group. I'm afraid of what they're going to do to me for having these thoughts. And therefore I'm unwilling to say they were mine, or I'm unwilling for you to say they were mine, or I'm unwilling to say that I participated in any way. And that can be partly what's something that's happening in the group dynamics, but it can also be an individual thing. It can also be something that's like, you kind of have to look in your own individual self and say, when I do that, or if I do that, or if I'm kind of like in the background trying to give people ideas, but I don't want to, why am I doing that? And there are valid reasons to do it. Maybe you know that there is some longstanding conflict between, say, me and somebody else in the group, and that the idea will be better heard from somebody else. Or maybe there's a mentoring kind of relationship with somebody in the group where you're like, well, encouraging them to share, and it's easier to share somebody else's idea. All of those.
Well,
kinds
like
of
what
things.
you were saying, so oftentimes for me, there have been places throughout my life that I have been the only woman in the room.
Right.
And that's fine. What I have learned along the way, I didn't do it right or wrong, but how I proceeded affected the outcome.
Right.
So my target goal and outcome was not where it landed because of the process, how I went about it.
Right.
And one of the best things I have learned is figuring out who my allies are on an idea project, and then working with them, basically learning to be far more collaborative. That's probably part of why I am so collaborative, is I've always had to be, once I figured out that working in collaboration, A, the project always got better.
Right.
And B, it was better heard from a group of us.
Right.
Then it was not just the one woman in the room talking.
Right.
And C, it just overall was a more enjoyable experience, honestly.
Yeah, a lot less conflict, a lot less people rolling their eyes at you, a lot less people tuning out. At this point, it would look like, a bunch of guys leaning back in their chairs, playing with their phones while you're talking. All of those kinds of
No, they usually didn't waste.
nonverbal.
They didn't have phones when they first started.
Yeah.
So they would just cut me off.
Yeah,
it was just real. Oh, you know what? That's not on our agenda, so we're just going to keep going. And yeah. No, it was far more direct.
Far more direct than that. That's funny.
Yeah, but that's I didn't assess the politics in the room. And that was 20-ish plus years ago.
Let's have another conversation another day. I'm really struggling with this, the way you're presenting this. Not the way you're presenting it, because I know that you didn't do anything wrong. I know that having your own thoughts and voicing them in a room full of men was not wrong.
I know it wasn't wrong.
Of course it wasn't.
I never
wrong.
left there feeling wrong.
Good.
I just knew what I wanted wasn't going to happen the way I wanted it to,
because you didn't play the game.
I didn't play the game.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the game another day. Yes. I'm exhausted.
That's part of what holds people up when it comes to the permission.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I'm saying, is that it wasn't that I was asking permission from the room. I didn't get a team of us together.
Right.
That was my point.
Right.
It's just there's an alliance, and these environments. I think
and
it's
that
important.
happens anyway. That happens in working groups anyway. You get camps of people who have, kind of essentially agreed, and and then those camps end up with a spokesperson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so when we talk about that, but I think that the concept of, I think that's a good topic for another day. Mm-hmm. I think the concept of waiting for permission it goes past group settings, because I see it in individual tasks as well. You can always tell when an employee has been micromanaged a lot, because they are terrified of doing anything without express permission to do it. And all of a sudden, what that looks like is somebody sitting there twiddling their thumbs, looking like they're not going to the next step of something or doing the next thing because they're waiting on permission. And it can look, if you don't understand it, it can look like they're being lazy, or it can look like they don't know what they're doing. But in reality, they're just terrified to continue moving forward because they've been so beaten down and micromanaged in the past.
I would say one of the most important things I learned, and have in speaking to other people that have been minorities in circumstances in a variety of different capacities, is one, being comfortable in your own skin. Mm-hmm. And then the second one was then having confidence in what you're going to communicate. I will forever remember the one other woman that was in my class when I was taking surveying and engineering. Mm-hmm. She was only there a semester.
Okay.
She asked about 8 million questions, constantly. Like the teacher said one sentence, she asked 5 questions.
Oh, annoying.
That projected directly onto me.
Right.
Because she was the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
And that projected onto me.
Yeah.
And she couldn't understand why I was annoyed at her.
Right.
And I did explain it to her. I'm like, you're not understanding. You're affecting my life.
Right.
They're like, people are asking to not have me on their survey crews, to not work with me because
you're doing this.
Yes. And it's who you are. And I get that.
Yeah.
They don't understand, and it's confusing. And that's the space we're in. And
Right.
that was one of actually the reasons she recognized she was not in the right environment or career choice.
Sure.
And she moved gears. But it was definitely interesting. That was a space where not only did I loved that she had the confidence to not ask permission. She did not feel any delay. And that part I admired about her. In that moment, I was like, that's good. I'm assessing
She's
the
going to
entire
hold her
scene.
space.
She is.
She's
and
going to
that
hold her
part
space.
I admired. The other part was her complete lack of being able to read the room. I'm like, I need some of her confidence, but I'll keep my intuition.
But let's not assume. Just because
That's
she
true.
did it doesn't mean that she wasn't reading the room. It means that maybe she didn't care. Maybe this is.
But is that part of being a group or not?
This is the thing, though. This doesn't execute all the way in a way that we all understand or agree. Conflict can happen in all kinds of ways, and confidence looks like all kinds of things.
Good point.
Insecurity looks like all kinds of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they
can mask.
And they can mask on each other. And so we can't tell somebody's motivation by their actions.
That was good.
There's no way to do it. All we can say is ask the question about the behavior.
Yeah.
But we cannot project so that's why I say waiting for permission. This is a hard one because it can be fear. It can be the environment. It can be the individual.
Mm-hmm.
It can be the circumstance or situation. It can be because, an employee can be waiting for permission because they haven't been trained well.
Yeah.
An employee can be waiting for permission because they don't know different. Maybe they're young. Maybe other environments that they've been in have required that of them. And so it looks very different on different people, and we can't tell why.
Yeah,
just from looking at the outside. So I would challenge that and say maybe she just didn't care.
That could if we factor that in there, it makes it even more interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like it still plays out.
It still plays out the way it plays out. It still
projects onto me, and I still have to deal with some of the consequences of it. Like at the end of the day, whatever was going on over there was still got on me.
Yeah.
And that is how environments work.
Yes.
That is how teams work like that. And that is part of the permission thing. I have to say one of the most annoying. So I was doing research for this topic, and there were a variety of places that talked about ways to deal with that, things you can do. I have to say there was at least 5 websites I read. Anyways, they all, I didn't agree with most of what they said.
Sure.
That's what I would say. Because it was all about me shifting who I am to conform to that space.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me really uncomfortable. I thought, and these were written in the last 3 years. And they were not all written by dominant groups of people, some of them. And I found that interesting. I had resistance to I'm not saying they were wrong.
Right.
But I was like, wow, if a person has to Jenga themselves at that level,
then it's probably not the right environment.
That's where I was at. I'm just like that's too much to me.
But again, what else
at
can
this
you
point
control but yourself?
Right.
All we can control in in situations is ourselves and our behavior.
Yes.
So
fair.
Impacting others or having conversations is part of what we can do.
Yes.
But again, we can't control their behavior. We can't control how they're going to take that conversation. All we can control is ourselves and the circumstances and situations that we put ourselves in. And even that has some privilege to it because not everybody gets to control their circumstances and situations to that level.
Fair.
Not everybody has all of the job choices that other people have.
You're right.
And so sometimes all you can control is how you approach it.
That's fair. And that's probably if I look back, that's probably exactly what I was doing in my 20s, navigating that. Like I was,
because it's all you
and
can
that's
do.
probably why I'm getting louder. That's probably why I get louder with age.
Well, because now
I just couldn't do it.
Now we
anymore.
get to use our experience and our skills and our thing to walk into spaces where we can impact that for the future for others.
Well, and I'm only going to put myself in a space where I can be of value to the whole. At this point, I'm going to assess.
But that experience with the surveying classes is going to lead you to, I don't know, be on the local technical college board, so that you can impact those spaces for future generations of women who are interested in STEM fields, who are interested in construction fields, who are interested in what we would think of as non-traditional
places that might require a biffy instead of a real restroom. That's how I put it. I'm like, on-site location restroom.
Notice the biffy is not a sponsor.
No, they should be though. You too can enjoy it.
Excuse me. So yeah, I think I think this is a really interesting conversation because it's hard when we think about waiting for permission. I get annoyed when people don't move. I get annoyed when people just are stuck and they're like, well, but to me, it sounds like an excuse. To me, it sounds like an excuse for not doing anything. And I have to check that all the time.
Well, that's just your fill in the blank statement. Like that's how I see this, it equals that.
But the thing is, and I referred to myself in a meeting yesterday as a sledgehammer personality. And I think that that's true. Because it's like, I just do the things and I just do it. And sometimes, and that hurts people sometimes, and it leaves people behind sometimes. And it impacts my relationships with people sometimes. And there are things that I've done over my life to be more aware of that so that I can control it a little bit better. But at the same time, that's a fundamental part of who I am.
It's a core process of how you do things. It's
never going to change fundamentally. I'm always going to take up space in that way. And it impacts other people and their ability and comfort level saying things out loud. So I get annoyed when people are waiting for permission because I don't understand why they're not just going forward too. Right? And because it doesn't make any sense to me that you wouldn't just keep going if in the absence of if somebody's not standing there, like why not? Right. But that's not how everybody thinks.
Nope. And that's awesome that you have that insight. And that's part of leadership. And that is part of business ownership. And I would say that's part of why we're always honing and expanding and looking into other perspectives. Right. And incorporating that, because we do need to do that to have the outcomes that I'm seeking. When I'm in a group, I'm seeking the most optimal outcome from the group of people I have the opportunity to be with.
Yeah.
And I know you are. I know that's yes. And so for that, it does mean that I have to step sometimes outside of maybe my comfort or outside of how I would normally just like if I'm.
And I also have to step outside of what I think optimal is.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think optimal is one thing and the group thinks it's something different.
And they will, if you're outnumbered, they will steer in that direction. You can try to lead it, but trust me, that horse is going to a different bucket of water.
Well, and there's something that I challenged myself to do right before the pandemonium, the panda bear. Yes. Right before all of that, I challenged myself. I'm like, how can I get involved in a group without it de facto coming back to me to lead the group?
Yeah.
Because some people, and people like this, and we can call them sledgehammer people. I'm comfortable with that because I'm one of them. I don't think that necessarily sounds like a bad thing. I think that's a very useful tool if you're trying to knock down a wall. Mm-hmm. And so maybe not so much if you're trying to, navigate a China shop, but
yes,
right. Everything in its place. But we end up a lot of times, the loudest voice in the room ends up being the one that people look to lead that space. And so I did intentionally join efforts that I wanted nothing to do with leading. And it didn't work out very well.
Oh, interesting.
It didn't work out very well because I pushed against leadership to the point where I had to be a jerk about it.
Oh.
And where I just didn't want it. And I just had to, and there are some of those spaces that I ended up having to leave.
Yeah.
Because
you weren't a right fit for the overall
cohesive group and where the group was going. And therefore, we're all better off if I'm not there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true of all conflict.
No,
that is not true of all kinds of conflict, especially in group dynamics, because sometimes the person that you think of as the one that brings the most conflict is the person that is pushing the group further and farther and more forward than anybody else, because they're the ones who are bringing up the hard things.
Yes.
And so thinking about yourself and permission and group dynamics and fear and anxiety and how you fit, it has a lot of connotation to it, and it changes in different environments.
And definitely, I hope through this conversation, we've gotten you thinking about the fact, where is this in your life? What environments is this coming up? And should it be, just look at it. That would be my recommendation. Just kind of become aware of it. Should it shift? How is your leadership when it comes to this? Are there some people? Quite often, one of the things I learned being part of peer support groups, because you have to wait your turn quite often. So it'll go around a circle and 10 people might have said things. And I'm like, ooh, I always had to have a small notebook. Mm-hmm. And I would just jot things down as they were talking. I'm like, ooh, and I'd write things. What was beautiful is when it finally came over to me, most of the time what I'd written down, I never needed to open my mouth and say.
Right.
Somebody else, this is what I learned, or somebody else in the group said it even better. Yeah. Created a different bond and connection. Or by the time it came to me, I was able to say it and connect more dots. And actually it was more useful for me.
More powerful.
And that I have kept that tool in my toolbox. So when I am in meetings and stuff, I always have a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'm always just jotting down a little something and formulating. And what's interesting is sometimes I'll be sitting right next to somebody else who's catching this, and they'll be reading along and they'll add to it. That's what I love. They'll add to it a little bit. And then when it gets to us, we toss out this great, that's when it's a great group to me. Yeah. It's like when we're that kind of cohesive. Yeah. So I hope you become more aware from this conversation of where this is in your space and what you can do.
And be thinking about all of the different things that can motivate somebody to hold back a little bit, or to wait, or to ask for permission, or to seek permission. And then think about, if you're doing that, are you doing it intentionally or not? Mm-hmm. Are you doing that on purpose? And if so, why? And if you're not doing it on purpose, why not? Why is it the default behavior? Why is it the default thing to do? And maybe it needs to be a different room that you're in, or maybe you just want you need to come at collaboration in a slightly different way, in order to have your voice heard. But I'll tell you that when it's not dealt with on either side, it's all about the resentment. And so getting this resolved long term helps groups stick together. It helps groups become more productive. And whether it's an employee or an employer or a volunteer board, having that underlying resentment from undisclosed conflict is one of the worst things that there can be. Just under the surface, it just rots everything from underneath.
Yeah. It's corrosive.
Bad. We need something uplifting. I don't know. Can we just cut to a clip of puppies or something? I
wish, wouldn't that be awesome?
Let's just, I'm just going to think about puppies.
The uplifting thing is, here's my uplifting thing. I was at a recent event. This is about being the minority in the room, right?
Okay.
So I was at an uplifting event recently where they were raising money for, in particular, women in STEM and trades.
Okay.
And I wound up leaving there and I started to cry. I couldn't figure it out. The whole thing's over.
Uplifting?
Yes, because it's so positive.
Okay.
It was a happy cry. It was a happy cry because I went, oh my gosh. I, for the first time in a long time in this environment, felt really supported. Because here was this amount of money being raised, all focused on helping other young women step into this space. and create those jobs. It just felt so good. And it was a collaborative thing, and it came from a diverse group of people. It was just lovely. And I went, this was worth waiting for. I'm like, you know what? This was it. So that's my positive story. Don't give up. That's what I would say. Don't give up. Yep. You're there. You're there for a reason.
Sometimes the idea is worth waiting for.
And it was so well worth it.
That's so good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of If These Heels Could Talk. And we will have another fabulous topic